When we picture the Second World War, we usually imagine a giant geopolitical chessboard. We think of grand strategy, negotiated by three men sitting in armchairs, drawing sweeping lines across continents. This was the first conflict scaled entirely by industrial output. Factories churned out thousands of identical tanks, weapons, and planes, reducing the fight to a brutal math equation of mass production. Military doctrine dictated that victory came from securing supply routes and moving vast numbers of troops across rigid hand-drawn lines. The plan was supposed to be orderly, but that order evaporates the second you are cramped inside a landing craft, listening to the roar of artillery. On the ground, the fog of war sets in, and carefully drafted plans dissolve into chaos. And when that mechanical system breaks down, it leaves a vacuum. As the blueprint burns away, we find the outliers, the rogue individuals whose wildly unpredictable actions defied all statistical logic and broke the war machine. The first way to break the machine is through weaponized audacity. When an entire military is trained to respond to logical, predictable tactics, doing something completely irrational paralyzes them. Take Jack Churchill. In the middle of an industrialized, mechanized firefight, he charged into battle armed with a broadsword and a longbow. The sheer absurdity of a man playing medieval knight against machine guns left opposing forces thoroughly terrified and confused. Then there is Canadian scout Leo Major. During the Allied push into the Netherlands, he was tasked with quietly reconnoitering a Dutch city to identify targets for artillery. Instead of sneaking around like a standard scout, he threw out the stealth manual entirely. Under the cover of darkness, Major sprinted through the streets by himself, firing randomly and lobbing grenades in every direction. He created an absolute wall of noise, tricking the entrenched German garrison into thinking a massive army was attacking. He didn't call down heavy artillery to level the city and risk civilian lives. He relied completely on an extreme bluff, capturing scores of armed soldiers and securing the town of Zwolle essentially on his own. Total theatrical chaos works because a rigid military structure doesn't know how to compute it. They expect a chess move, and instead, someone flips the board. The second anomaly is the inside threat. Why fight a grinding war of attrition on the front lines when a single individual can bypass the border entirely and rot the enemy from within? Consider the unfathomable bravery of Polish officer. He voluntarily allowed himself to be captured and sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp, specifically to build an underground resistance network and smuggle out the very first intelligence reports of the atrocities happening inside. On the opposite, sinister end of the spectrum is the Nazi commando Otto Skorzeny, a man who weaponized deep cover infiltration to execute operations that sound like spy fiction. In 1943, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was overthrown and locked in a heavily guarded mountaintop hotel. Skorzeny organized a raid using silent gliders, crashing them onto the tiny alpine plateau, overwhelming the guards, and flying the dictator out before anyone could even sound the alarm. Later, during the Battle of the Bulge, Skorzeny dressed his German soldiers in captured American uniforms. They drove jeeps behind enemy lines, flipped road signs, and spread false orders, creating mass paranoia among American troops. A massive industrial defense system is useless if a rogue operative is already standing inside your perimeter. Finally, we see outliers in the form of extreme unit cohesion. Sometimes a tiny, isolated group operates with a synergy so unnatural it completely defies standard logistics. This chart compares the average kill count of a standard tank crew against the statistics of SS Commander Michael Wittman on the Eastern Front. With 119 enemy Tiger tank crew dwarfed the standard metrics of the war, operating with terrifying, heavily engineered efficiency. This tightly knit crew functioned perfectly together in a claustrophobic steel box. That mechanical synchronization allowed Wittman to act like a lone predator, ambushing and dismantling an entire column of Allied vehicles at Villers-Bocage. But unit cohesion doesn't always look like a grim death squad. On the bizarre end of the spectrum, we have Wojtek, a Syrian brown bear adopted by Polish soldiers wandering the Middle East. To get him onto a British transport ship, the Polish forces officially enlisted the bear as a private, complete with a serial number. Wojtek became a massive psychological boost, wrestling the men in camp and literally carrying heavy artillery shells during the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino. Whether it is a ruthlessly synchronized tank crew or soldiers rallying around a 200-pound bear, extreme synergy produces results that military planners simply cannot map on a spreadsheet. The sheer industrial might, millions of troops, and grand strategy of the Allied forces are ultimately what won the Second World War. But when we look back, the most terrifying and legendary moments of the conflict were dictated by these anomalies. The commanders pushing wooden blocks across a map only set the stage. The individuals willing to break every rule forged the actual outcome on the ground. Beneath the staggering statistics, the supply chains, and the meticulous blueprints of any massive system, the human element remains deeply chaotic, uncontrollable, and entirely unpredictable.